All right, so this lesson that we're doing today is our last thing that we're doing before we go to taking exam 1 and finish up unit 1. And then all the ideas we've used for the last several weeks will be incorporated into things that we see later on in the course, but we'll still be seeing it. So animism, again, concept we did on a different day. This is when the definition of living things is much broader than it is in Western culture. And it is also seeing that life can also be in things that aren't animals, can include plants, the landscape, weather patterns, and so forth. Now, the practitioners within animism, when we're speaking English and a few other languages, we tend to call them shaman or shaman or shamanic practice. And those individuals are going to be the part-time or full-time specialists in helping humans who cannot physically experience the incorporeal world to get answers, ask questions, interact, and know more about the totality of life than our basic senses can allow us to do. And in today's look, we're going to specifically look at the practice of achieving an altered state of consciousness. Now, the image here, we'll see this one a little bit later in the presentation too, is actually modern. This was taken not too long ago by somebody who is trusted and not part of this particular tribal group or First Nations group, but who does participate, and it is considered trustworthy by them. And what you see in this image is not day-to-day outfit. This is someone who is dressed in a completely handmade set of shirt, kind of a wide-legged pant, super fancy hat, carrying bags, belts, and so forth, when they go on these very, very long pilgrimages in order to interact with certain other living beings on the landscape who are not people. So we're looking at then specifically the role of altered states of consciousness. In other words, ancient and some modern people as well did know how to do certain activities that allowed your brain to reach out and experience the world and reality in a different way. And the reason in this subtitle, investigate the hallucinogens, the reason that hallucinogens is in a quotation mark is that we use that word popularly or for pop culture today, but it isn't specifically detailed enough to describe all that's going on here. So we're going to get a better definition and be more specific with the term hallucination. Okay. Okay, so you can either screenshot this if you do it that way, or just jot them down. They're going to come up later, but I do want you to see the inventory of terms that we haven't been using so far in course. So our key terms, and you do want these organized for Wednesday, because this finishes up the end of that big lesson, Worldview. For Mesoamerica, psychoactive, intoxication, I know you already know that one, but we're going to see a sciencey definition of that, narcotic, alkaloids, entheogen, dissociative, psychedelics, and deliriants. As you're jotting these down, you all, over here, dissociatives, psychedelics, and deliriants, I would either highlight those or put a star by them. These are 3 key components of the lesson that we'll get to as we're going towards the end. We are also going to go over quickly pharmacological altered state and psychological altered state. And then as far as some of the other living beings, so today I'm going to refer to them in the way that they would be referred to for the cultures that we're learning about in class. These other living beings were recognized as allowing themselves to be used under certain circumstances in order for humans to have contact with the incorporeal world, the things that your eyes, nose, taste, hands, and so forth can't interact with constantly. So we're going to talk about a few of them, including Soma, Amanita, Datura, Psilocybe, and Lophophora. These have other nicknames, and there's a couple others that'll pop up while we're going. But these would be more our college student terms or researcher terms. And last little note as we finish up on this particular one, psychoactive chemicals. So in other words, ingesting, breathing, rubbing it on your skin, sitting in it, inhaling it up your nose, all those sorts of things. In order to achieve an altered state of consciousness, it does not require at all times that any other chemical substance be part of this. Okay, my old man is screaming, I need to lock him in another room. He's really old and he's deaf, so I can't yell at him. He's really noisy. Okay, let's see if that helps. When we're old, we get our own ways of being, and pets aren't really any different than humans. All right, so many shaman do not require the use of anything outside of their own body and their own consciousness in order to do their work, but in some systems they do. Just depends on the person. So it isn't required at all times. So are we good? It looks like those of you that I can see are pretty good with this. And these terms will pop up as we go along too. Sometimes it's a lot easier when we already take a minute and spell them all out and have them on the list before we move on. Okay, so let's go forward. And of course, if we have to slow down as we're going, you'll see these as we go. Okay, so firstly, let's define an altered state of consciousness first. If we're going to have a lesson on it, we need the definition. So in this case, for us, altered state of consciousness refers to a chemical disruption or disturbance in the brain. Some of you might already know, maybe from your own just interests or perhaps from another course, that there have been also experiments where some of these substances are given to or applied around other kinds of animals or organisms to see how they affect them as well. So chemical disruption or disturbance of your brain. So an altered state of consciousness, the person is still functioning in a certain way, but not with all the same contacts or not with all the same chemical links as when we don't have this as part of our system. So the changes that we're going to take a look at have to do with altering general awareness. So what I'm going to say person, what the person thinks that they're seeing, hearing, where they think they are, depending on the chemistry that they're interacting with. It may change what their questions or interest is, or what they're even noticing. So mood and attitude are often altered. And then this one, of course, consciousness or their perception. So again, what do they see and hear? What are they thinking about? Where do they think they are? Does it feel like they're in their own physical body or not? Do they feel as if they are in a non-corporeal state? And then, of course, behavior. In some of these circumstances that we're going to look at today, people do remember fairly clearly or quite clearly after the event has changed. But in some of them, people don't remember real specifically what was going on with their consciousness. And in that particular case, then their friends or attendees or other people as part of it would have some role to play in the information that's collected. Okay, so any of those terms will be fine. Now, what are some of these substances that we know that the ancient world knew all about and that we still study today? So the image right here is one that I just found as a quick example, because we won't be talking about this particular culture for a long time in course, but this image down here has the corner, and it shows a sculpture of a Nahuatl or Mexica deity. We know them today as Aztec. They didn't really call themselves that specifically. And it shows this person here on their shoulder. So this would be the eye, and the hand is up by the mouth. On the shoulder, that there are these images. They might have been body paint. Some of these were certainly probably tattooed into the skin for the practitioners. But here's a little inventory of some of these icons here. And I'm not going to ask you to identify them specifically as to what they refer to, but I do know that some of you are quite interested in this for a variety of other personal and academic reasons. So for instance, in this particular deity associated with certain types of holidays and practices, that these little flowery items, even this little round one, and some of these little curly-cue kind of things here are actually very specifically related to their interest and use of very specific species of plants. So in this case, in Mesoamerica, while most of the substances that may have been used or actually really participated with. So they didn't really see themselves as using them. That's kind of a modern English word. But most of the things that they were interacting with were plant-based. However, next unit we'll talk about something else that actually is a product coming from animals. But today we're just going to stick with plants. There's a certain point where you can't learn any extra. So your brain is full. So generically, in other words, just all of the types of plants and all of the types of changes that they might make to the brain, we sort of in popular culture today call them hallucinogens. But not all of them cause you to hallucinate, which is interesting. All right. So again, I'm recording this one, so you can jot down what you like, and then I'll send you, when they tell me that it's done and uploaded, I can send you a link so you could see some of this again if you like it or want to. So these types of plants, wide use in the Americas, from the Arctic Circle all the way down to the tip of South America. Mesoamerica does have some of its own key species of plants that were not present everywhere else in the world. And in some cases, they had some that were widely available in a variety of places in the world. All right. So let's define some of those terms that you jotted down before we started. Now, we'll just keep using hallucinogen, the generic term for it right now. We will get more specific as we go. So it turns out that we need to think about what toxic is and the relationship to your system when you ingest any of these sorts of things. The reason that these plants, and medicinal ones as well, ones that are still in use for us today, cure or relieve illness or discomfort is because they are toxic. And toxic in this case, for us every day, when somebody says, oh, it's a toxin, it makes us think that they're talking about something that might kill you. However, it really, the difference between calling something chemical a medicine, a poison, or a narcotic is really dosage. It isn't that many things that we put on our skin or breathe in or sometimes ingest for other reasons in a certain amount wouldn't result in being very difficult to survive. It's really more that we know how much or how frequently or in what manner that we can ingest or put these things into our system. So friends, I think some of you know, you can actually kill yourself with taking too much water into your system. If you overhydrate your system, then electrolytes can't work and your system can break down. So for instance, a plant-based chemical that is important for health-based reasons, digitalis, is actually extremely poisonous depending on your dose. And actually, so is nicotine, and so is caffeine. In fact, while nicotine use as far as smoking cigarettes and similar today is gone down in some formats. In the ones that seem that where they've learned to, well, they learned that their consumers weren't going to use as many cigarettes because it became obvious that it was killing you and causing wrinkles and damaging your children's health and so on and so forth. So they switched it over to something that has been marketed as not being unsafe. And while it might have a few parts of it that aren't quite as bad, the vaping thing is also something that's not healthy. But nicotine plant, the Nicotiana plant itself is native to the Americas. So smoking tobacco, you all, wasn't even in Europe and the rest of the world until visitors came to the Americas and met this plant as it was in use by Native American populations. Wild nicotine, though, is really poisonous. Those native cultures never used these things for a habit. It wasn't for entertainment. It wasn't for day-to-day. It was never used casually. And part of the reason it wasn't is that the original form of tobacco, or the source of this nicotine, was so strong that if you did more than inhale a tiny little bit of it, that it would actually kill you. And some of you know that, right? Nicotine or tobacco plants, the extracts of them have been commonly used in insect poisons. They're really, really deadly. It's really not safe for your system, but meaningfully enough, it makes you addicted, which is also a really interesting thing. And caffeine as well. It's not a real healthy product. But you can use them in certain amounts. So the plants that are actually grown commercially today for the nicotine that's used either in cigarettes or cigars or in vaping has actually been bred to be weaker so that you can be addicted but not die too fast. I know, the beauty of business. Okay, so anything that generically is a hallucinogen is toxic. And so that means that they induce intoxication. That's the middle term part here though, intoxication. There are also all in a group that are called narcotics. We also have that term, right, in law enforcement and popular culture and so forth. So college student definition of narcotic is any substance that no matter how stimulated you feel when you first bring it into your system, ends with having an extremely depressive state on your nervous system. So you start out maybe feeling more awake or more interested or more active or more understanding of it, but as it goes through its stages of being used by your system, then everything closes down, where maybe at the end people go unconscious, fall asleep, forget, don't function as well, don't feel energetic or so forth. So alcohol and tobacco are narcotics under this definition, as we all have at least seen, if not experienced. But stimulants then, which aren't necessarily that healthy for you, like caffeine, are not narcotic. They don't start off with a stimulation that then ends up with a depressive state on your system. Everything that we are looking at today, though, does it this way. So it starts off with some sort of stimulation or change in your awareness, and then as it moves through the states of the use in your system, the people will end up with a very, in many cases, very strong after effect that is depressive. Indigenous or tribal populations usually mention this as being the cost or the price of being allowed to have these experiences. So if it's a full day of vomiting or incredible indigestion with massive diarrhea, or you're too sick or confused to get out of bed, or you're just feeling horrible for some period of time, because these are very special, and for them, these are very sacred experiences with the incorporeal, then that's the price. That it shouldn't be easy, it shouldn't be cheap, it shouldn't be something that everyone can do every day without any cost to your system, because they believe that these other beings, the plants, you listed some of them like soma and psilocybe and lophophora, that those plants are other beings and they have consented to allow you to share their reality. And so there's a cost because they gave you something special. Interesting. Certainly not the way that right, recreational chemical abuse is viewed in our society today at all. So all hallucinogens are narcotics. But here's the other interesting thing about them. None of them are physiologically addictive. So this is another really interesting thing to think about with these. So none of them actually cause physical addiction where the person feels like or can't actually function without them in their system. You pay a price, but then it cleans out of your system and you go back to being yourself. Is that surprising to you all that that none of them are addictive? It seems, right? We always think about or we're taught a lot in our society that you shouldn't use any of these, and I'm not saying you should, but none of these things should be used because you'll end up as an addict and it'll destroy your life forever. It turns out that some of the most engaging and most overwhelming of these kinds of chemical substances actually don't beg you to put them back in the system anymore. They don't make anything about your body require that you keep using them. Okay, so again, here's another one. We're thinking about hallucinogens and some of these other substances. So anything that is ingested for other than nutritional purposes. So none of these are used for energy, for food or fuel or needing to survive. But in every case, these psychoactive, I'll type it over here. Yeah, well, yes, we can actually personality-wise get ourselves backed into a corner where we get focused on something and we have to do it over and over and over again, but that's a different type of mental focus here. It isn't biochemical in that case. So again, these psychoactive substances, they're ingested for other than nutrition and will have a noticeable effect on the body or the mind. So things that we don't see with these that we're studying about are stupor, like not being able to move or not being there at all. Narcosis, somewhat similar to that, or excessive stimulation, when people are so revved up, but they're hitting things and running around and jumping off buildings and don't know who they are and are damaging people and things and themselves. These are not the real integral effects of the group of things that we're looking at, and that were in really important, effective use for certain purposes in this part of the ancient world. Intelligence, however you would define that, like being able to remember, knowing, understanding, analysis, or long-term memory impairment, very minimal, very minimal outcome for that. And then absence of addiction or biochemical craving. I know. Yes, that kitty is super duper loud. That's not even, you're not even hearing him at his loudest. I mean, he's just, I've never heard an animal that was so loud. And now that he's deaf and 18, sometimes when he's not feeling happy, he can just go on and on. So as my husband said the other day, if the family didn't like rock and roll, they wouldn't be able to live with a pet like this. He's just really like, oh. So, all right. Now let's look at some of these. So again, intoxication, I just put the toxic in black so you can see that it's part of that term. Usually we just use that term in our lives today to describe the effects of alcohol. They'll say you're intoxicated, but in reality, any substance that's really going to do this, that's really going to change the way your brain is working, intoxicates. So there are some more specifics, and I want to give you some college introduction, but mainly we want to get into how it was used in the ancient world, but also a little bit of vocabulary and information here, so that if you wanted to learn more about it or become more expert about it, that you could have a good starting spot for making some searches and doing some reading. Okay, so how does this happen? So as you just jotted down, that yes, when they are consumed, they cause some changes to the way the brain experiences the world. So how does that happen? How does it make some changes, but it doesn't totally knock you out? The people aren't unconscious. They are conscious, it's just a different set of input. So all the psychoactive plants that we're looking at for this contain nitrogen atoms that belong to a group called alkaloids. So they're going to be in groups with a really specific chemical output. In fact, the reason that you didn't see me write down cannabis as part of this is that cannabis can, at certain levels, have some psychoactive properties, but it is not an alkaloid. And so it doesn't make some of the changes that we're talking about here. So interestingly enough, we don't really have any information that's specific from Mesoamerica that cannabis was used at all. This was not one of the ones that they were really that interested in. Did they know it exists? Probably, but it did not make the kinds of changes that they found important to contacting and experiencing the incorporeal world. So again, it's about the fourth time we've said this, but it's okay. Repeating means that somewhere in your notes you'll have it just where you want it. So generically, we talk about this nitrogen or alkaloid consciousness alteration as hallucination, but that's not always what's going on. Hallucination does have a very specific or technical definition. All right. So here's our three. So hallucinogen or hallucination is a generic, but there are actually three distinct forms of altered states of consciousness. And you can find lots more details on this online or in writing. Psychedelics, dissociatives, and deliriants. Deliriants are sometimes called the true hallucinogens, but it's only one of the three types. So of the plants that we know they used in Mesoamerica, part of the reason why they use a number of different species or integrated with several different entities in their world is that they didn't give you the same experience. You didn't learn exactly the same things about the rest of reality in the same exact way. So psychedelics, dissociatives, and deliriants. So for all of them, again, the effects are usually temporary. All three of them produce some changes in your perception. It might be something like having a different awareness of time, location, the space, or in some cases, that part all still seems the same, but actually what you know about yourself has changed. Changes in mood, changes in your thoughts. Those are going to be the three big categories of things that tend to become different. How? So if these alkaloids, right, if these nitrogen alkaloids cause interaction with your brain chemistry, how is it that the person isn't just knocked out or just falls asleep or just doesn't have any clarity of function at all? The reason why is those alkaloids are pretty similar. They're not exactly the same, but pretty similar to certain types of hormones. You all, hormones aren't just produced in your ovaries and testes. Hormones are a type of protein that's produced in a number of ways to do lots of different functions in your system, actually. So in fact, actually insulin, right, that manages blood sugars and that sort of thing is a form of hormone. So there are hormones that help your brain do what they're supposed to be doing. And the alkaloid hallucinogens are similar. That means they change your brain function and cognition, but they don't turn it off or confuse it so badly that it isn't possible for you to still be a human being having an experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at some point the old man will come in and I'll hold him up. He's not very big too, he's super loud, but he's only like a 7-pounder. So here's a very cool term for you that is good to know as a modern person and a college student, and that's the term entheogen. Hey, have you ever noticed that when your instructors write something down in giant bold or with number or in certain colors, that means for sure you're going to see that as a question on a quiz or an activity, because that's how I do it. When I for sure want to make sure that nobody doesn't notice something, because I know you're going to answer questions about it, I try to highlight it. Okay, so an entheogen is one of these generic hallucinogens that is commonly used in shamanic rituals. So it's just a generic term for these products. And it means that it is a substance that's used to either facilitate healing, communication with the spirit world, or divination, right? Thinking that you are contacting the spiritual world. So hallucinogens used in shamanic type rituals for healing, divination, or achieving an altered state of consciousness. And you can, some of you already know because you've seen this before. See the term here, theo? This has to do with godliness. Did you know, you all probably have heard people talk about avocados as food of the gods. So the avocado, aguacate. Avocados, their science name is another one, or also chocolate. Chocolate is more specific. Its science name is Theobroma cacao. And what Theobroma cacao means is food of the gods, chocolate. I'm like one of the only people in the world that doesn't actually like it that much. I don't think it tastes bad, I just don't really like it. But apparently my brain is weird, because most people's brains, if they have any chocolate, crave having more chocolate because it's food of the gods. So the theo part, right? Achieving a, oh yeah, I don't know why, I just, a little tiny taste of it's fine, and then it just coats my mouth and I'm kind of done, which is lucky, because I certainly do crave a whole bunch of other unhealthy stuff. So yeah, so entheogen, a plant used in these circumstances. So since they share basic structure as some of your normal brain hormones, they act at those same receptors in your nervous system. And the result is that your brain is still working, it's just getting a different result out of its experience. So it's altering certain things, suppressing some of the others, stimulating a few other of your intake systems, or your understanding, or otherwise modifying it. All right, so they're not so chemically strange that you can't function at all anymore. They're just enough to make it so that you're, let's say, looking with your eyes, but your eyes can see a ton of colors that you can't normally see. So one of the products, and you may have seen this from West Mexican indigenous artworks, particularly they do them in fabric with threads. Sometimes they do painting on little figurines, where every single color they use is neon and glows in the dark, because under that state, that's what their eye can see. But your eyes can't see glow in the dark all the rest of the time. It's part of the reason why they want to have those experiences. So their system may be able to see or understand things that it normally can't. Which you probably already basically knew about these. All right, so I'm going to, from this one, so we're going to take a look at just a quick little bit of video here, because it's really great and interesting in regards to modern medical experimentation with psilocybin. Psilocybin is one of the ones that you're taking a look at. Psilocybin comes from a group of plants that are categorized as fungal or funguses. Psilocybin was widely used in the ancient world, is still used today, and now we're beginning to see that it may be useful for some things that have more medical or psychological need for us. But I do want to throw this in here just in case. I am not saying that any of us should try this stuff out or necessarily do this on your own. And the hallucinations, right, the experience that people have underneath this can be completely unpleasant. They didn't just participate in this because you felt like you were in paradise or heaven. There were many other things that were going on. So I have to go out of this screen and go to, I can't get it to go straight through without stopping and starting again, but I'm just going to let the recording keep going. Okay, so stop share. And I'm going to go back to share because I want to go to this one. You need to share the sound of this. We open it up. Okay, can you all see this screen right here where it's from the 60 Minutes TV show? Okay, and so you could watch this again if you're very interested or you know someone else that is. And then also they do have the transcript for this of the experience of it, that you could go back and read it. So as we're looking right now, it's cbsnews.com, and then you can find it there. Okay, so let's take a look.
Or magic mushrooms. But as we reported last fall, these powerful, mind-altering substances are now being studied seriously by scientists inside some of the country's foremost medical research centers. They're being used to treat depression, anxiety, and addiction, and early results are impressive, as are the experiences of the study's volunteers, who go on a 6-hour, sometimes terrifying, but often life-changing psychedelic journey deep into their own minds.
The story will continue in a moment.
When your psoriasis is bad, it can be hard to see what's possible. But the possibilities become clear with Taltz, the first and only treatment of its kind offering a chance at 100% clear skin. With Taltz, up to 90% of those with moderate to severe psoriasis saw a significant improvement of their psoriasis plaques.
I can get it to do that while we're waiting. They make you watch some ads if you want to see the show for free. Isn't that so US?
Tell your doctor about infections, symptoms, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop, worsen, or if you've had a vaccine or plan to. Serious allergic reactions can occur. See the possibilities. Ask your doctor about Taltz.
In case you're wondering...
Okay, so I'm going to get out of this one and go back over here for that one. And we're going to move past that. So oops, I've got some other stuff that I need to be able to find. So I need to pull up some other. Okay, so one of the reasons why I thought that it was worth our time to watch that for a few minutes is because, go ahead and make that go down, is because it was so interesting to hear people talk about this particular substance that's been in use by indigenous or native populations for tens of thousands of years, as if we just discovered it just now, that having to be in a scientific setting would be the only way to really be able to know what's going on with that particular type of circumstance. But the other thing that I thought was very good was their graphics, and it gives us a better idea of why this is so important for ancient societies that use these, because, as they said, even just now that you know scientifically, it just causes parts of your intellect, your brain, and your experience to interact in a way that can never happen in any other way. Now, these people, just as a disclaimer, these people were using these substances, and they were giving them a massive single dose, and they were being monitored. That's probably not exactly how it was used in the ancient way, but it gave you some idea just for that one, just for psilocybin, about how it really changed what you know is going on in the world. That while the person said, yes, you can see sound, or those kinds of other influences. Okay, so we'll go back over to the lesson part. So we can do a little bit more. We don't need to do that part for that one. And if for any reason you wanted to have that link to the program because you wanted to watch it again, you could probably find it on your own, right? It's 60 minutes, and then you can just type in psilocybin, but I can send it to you as well. All right, so let's pull this up. And again, probably the most commonly used of the plants in ancient Mesoamerica are Datura, which probably all of you have heard of. I'm thinking Lophophora, that's its science name. We'll go to some of the nicknames here in a minute for our last few minutes in class. Psilocybin, Turbina, Ipomoea, and then something else called Amanita, or sometimes called Soma. And so again, you can see here. Now in Central America, there aren't as many of these types of plants, but some of you are very aware that there are species in South America that don't exist up here, that people all over the world, even today, go on vacations in order to try to have some interaction with. So let's look at them. Just a little bit on a few of them, some quick information here. Amanita. So Amanita is worldwide called Soma. And as we look at this real quickly, you're probably noticing, which I always find completely fascinating, that this is specifically the species of mushroom that was referred to in the Alice in Wonderland books, even though the books did have a message for children. This is an anciently used type of mushroom. It's got the little white dots on it and so forth. So they're sometimes called red caps. In this particular case, when someone consumes Amanita, that's its science name, or it's the other name that it's called worldwide, Soma, you put it in your system, and again, they saw it as its own being, that it went into your system, it allowed you to share its reality, but it was not broken down or taken apart. So when a person urinated, in many of these cultures, they would collect the urine because the active chemical, the soma, was still present also in that. Because this is a fungus, we would call it a mushroom, but it's a fungus, you can pick them, dry them, and when I say you, I mean people, I don't mean you all. Necessarily, they can be picked and dried, and then they can be traded over really long distances. This was a really powerful one that had that also exists in Europe and Asia as well. So Soma. Datura. Datura is a type of vine-like plant. They look like vines, and they have these beautiful trumpet-like flowers on them. There are cousins of the intoxicant Datura species that we use as just decorative plants in our gardens on yards. This is one where if it was not prepared by a specialist, it was insanely toxic and could actually kill people and animals. So it's very poisonous. Please don't handle this. Don't see the flowers, pick it, and try to do something with it. You guys are college students, but sometimes we try things. So here you can see a type of bush growing like this. During the Mexica or Aztec period, it was referred to as toloatzin or toloache, and it was made into things that they were consumed. But again, not as fun. Small doses under certain circumstances with a lot of attendance around you. So this is Datura. What do you want in your notes? It grows on a vine. It's a vine-like flower with kind of a trumpet shape to it. And here's one of the seed pods, which also can be toxic. Next one, Turbina. Turbina, also known as Ipomoea, is known as morning glory. These are also used, but they're cousin species that aren't quite as toxic and won't change your concept of reality. These can be used as just pretty things around your yard as well. Oh yes, angel's trumpet is another one. Yes, because there are cousins Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, because these can be really poisonous, and so lots of people with little kids don't have them in the yard. So now these were actually discovered by Spaniards, and oh, cool. And exported some samples of it back to Europe, where they noticed that they might have some uses medically for certain kinds of things. They're certainly beautiful, and they're a pretty similar shape, and they grow again on a vine-like plant. So turbina, it had a name in Nahuatl. That's not going to be a test question as what that name is, but just in case, because I know some of you already have those courses. Here's another one, psilocybe. So psilocybe itself doesn't look like the red cap mushrooms. They look very, you have to know what they're looking for, and they're kind of a dull looking one. But these were really commonly used in a lot of circumstances, and we know they had names in the Maya languages, in central Mexico, and again up in the highland Mexico. And so this one was even referred to as a deity. But again, they did see them, little flowers and divine flesh, they did see them as their own beings. So when you consumed it, as it shows this person doing here, then it means that the being allowed you to interact with it, and it would let you see what it could see or experience what it could see. So psilocybe. Psilocybin itself is just the chemical of it, that it is generally naturally produced in mushroom-like plants. All of these were thought to be not used. This is probably the most famous for modern folks, Lophophora, which is also called peyote in Spanish, but that's not its original name, right? Because they were talking about something else. And the chemical in it is mescaline. So mescaline's not a different type of plant. In this case, Lophophora is a cactus. And the first image of the man in the very fancy outfit, and these types of embroidered or woven items or other types of art that show these blossoms with the radiating bright colors and so forth, these are produced in West Mexico because the Huichol and other groups that are related, language related, have been producing these things for their own use, but they realize that tourists are very interested in them. So you can get earrings and tote bags and other kinds of images. The cactus itself, very small, low. In the United States, there is a tribal group that has always used Lophophora as part of its religious experience. And again, they are interacting with the rest of reality. They aren't getting high per se. And so there is actually, for those tribal members in the US, it is legal for them to use limited amounts of it. Unfortunately, lots of people who just want to try it out and then talk about it have spent a lot of time in the outdoors area where these cactuses grow, and they've made them practically extinct, which is a problem because the tribes that actually use it require this in order to have their ritual and their religious lives there. In this case, these can also be, they pick them carefully. If you just pull them out, it kills the whole plant, but they actually know how to harvest them carefully. They dry it and consume it, and then it stays in your system. It is thought that traditionally, up until very recent times, that all babies of some of these indigenous groups in the Huichol region had their first dose of Lophophora or peyote in their mother's breast milk. So again, it's not used outside of ritual activities, but it is very important, and they go on these pilgrimages. So you're learning, here's modern day Guadalajara. Lake Chapala is a little bit south and inland of this. So here's Banderas Bay here, where the popular tourist destinations are. So they're getting up here in the border between the state of Jalisco and the state of Nayarit. Oh, here we go. So with the arrows. So see in their outfits here, these are all handmade. The men do a lot of the weaving of this, but the embroidery and the cross stitching on the pants and the shirts is done by women. This deer is one of the sacred entities that they encounter when they are allowed to experience nature via the Lophophora or peyote. They have these special hats, and they go on these really long journeys out in order to have a travel before they do this. Nicotiana is another group. This one you didn't write down to so much, but you might have heard of some of these. Again, super toxic in some of them. They are related a little bit to things that we do eat, like tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, bell peppers, chili peppers, and that sort of thing they used as food. So, all right. So in our last few minutes here, so the ones that we're going to probably hear or see about more in the class are going to be mostly Lophophora and the mushrooms, the psilocybin, and either turbina or datura. Now, let's define those three terms a little bit more detailed, and then we'll call it a day, and I'll stop recording this and you'll be able to get a copy of this. So the psychedelics. No, ayahuasca comes from South America and has different chemicals in it. Peyote is a cactus, and so it's going to produce a different biochemical. But modern people are looking for sort of the same thing when they're looking for experiences. Okay, so if one of these plants is classified as a psychedelic, right, as that one of the three specifics, it indicates that a part of your mind is revealed that you're not always aware of. The plants that do this, that are technically psychedelics, are psilocybin, peyote, and from South America, the San Pedro cactus. In Peru, same thing happens with indigenous art. We see these cactuses on fabrics, on paintings, on pottery, on containers, things that were used when you were either participating in the ritual or you were consuming the product, either drinking it or being around it. So, and then, right, so what is the chemical that makes that happen in peyote? It's mescaline. So with these, when you see or hear or have an experience, as the people in the video were saying, that it's different parts of who you are and what you do and what you know are revealed that you would not be able to access in any other way that they've ever experienced or know how to do. So just in case you're more specifically interested, because also mescaline, or what's called peyote in the United States, is part of a Native American tribal legally allowed ritual process. For that one, it's just that what is in the cactus, is this particular one, is naturally occurring. It is a psychedelic. All of them that we're looking at are alkaloids, and there's a few other cactuses that will also have mescaline within them. And then there are some bean type plants that also have this. This is not going to be part of test question. I just have it in there because in the previous semester, students have been interested to know a little bit more. You'll just be answering about what is a psychedelic in general. The second one, how does it work? A psychedelic changes your brain's filtering capacity to prevent certain perceptions, emotions, and memories from dominating your conscious mind, but allow others to become more awareness. Super high doses of cannabis can produce a similar effect, but it is not classified as a psychedelic because of its sedative effect. So mostly people use cannabis in order for pain modification or to calm down. But you all do know that nowadays we have some modified forms that don't give you any consciousness change at all, but will interact with brain chemistry to help with things like, brain disorders that give you seizures. All right, dissociatives. Now, dissociatives are when the person is going to not be able to know so much about what's going on with your physical body. Your brain is active, but you can't feel, or you don't have the same awareness of physicality. So Amanita, or the soma, the red cap mushroom, does that. So you're not sure where you are, you're thinking, but you don't feel things. So remember, like in Alice in Wonderland, sometimes she thinks she's a giant, sometimes she thinks she's tiny. She doesn't always know where she is. That's dissociative. You are dissociating from the physical world. It does sort of the same thing as our modern day manufactured chemicals like PCP, sometimes called angel dust, or the reason why we're not able to buy some of these cough medicines over the counter easily anymore, because if you take too much of them, it does the same thing, or if you're sensitive to it. So a dissociative. So in dissociatives, because these are related to some of these others, it gives you these interesting states of mind, and we can see it in the art, a very specific look at some of these plants that are collected, and we see them in, this is Maya art, but it's clear that they are indicating that more is going on than a hunter who has stabbed a deer-like animal here. Deliriants. Deliriants do cause hallucination in a very formal sense. So datura, native tobacco, super high doses of modern, like diphenhydramine, antihistamines can do this. So, right, like the vine-like things. So deliriants. And partly it's called deliriant also as well because super high fevers will cause people in some cases to go into this deliriant state of hallucination. So deliriants are sometimes called the true hallucinogens, the true hallucination. In this one, we actually see a really old woodblock carving of these people where this person is actually blowing the substance up into the other person's nose. So they don't have to sniff it up themselves like the way you see people doing in 80s movies with cocaine. This is actually pushed up even harder. It's very painful by someone else blowing up a straw. How do they work? The effects are pretty similar to what happens when you have super high, almost endangering fevers. And they, with deliriants, may see, talk, or hear beings that no one else can see. So this one is something that surely many are familiar with shamanic practice. So the effects for the person who's undergoing this is a little like sleepwalking. They generally don't remember the entire experience. And deliriants are also very, very toxic. They make really big changes to the person's system. So these would be used when you had a group of people who were interacting with you while you had, right, while the activity was going on. And they would be able to record or ask the person questions and see if they answered or see what they did or see what they drew. But once the person came back to being themselves, then they would not have very much memory about what actually happened to them. So actually these brain changes go in several different ways. One where your body isn't really part of what you're experiencing, and so you're doing some other stuff. Others where your vision, hearing, smell, and so forth are extremely altered, and this one where you really are interacting with other beings. I think this is our last one. Yes, for this one. So let me stop on this share for this one. I need to go over here and stop recording that. Okay.